Hello, it's great to be here with you. I'm a little late because last weekend my son, his wife, Mary, and the children came down for the weekend. And this weekend, my daughter Betty Ann, her husband, and children came down for the weekend. And there's a lot of kids there. There's four in one family and five in the other, and I was kept busy. So I'm getting to the Bible study today, and I've enjoyed doing this Bible study, preparing for it, and I think you're in for a treat. We're going to do a snippet first, and that snippet has two columns on your first page. The author linked Exodus to to the story in Genesis. That reminds me of reading a sequel. If you read a book and then the sequel to that book, what happens is the author wants you to remember what was in the first book so he can continue in this second book. So he has kind of flashbacks and reminders throughout the book. Well, the biblical author does the same thing. In Genesis, he has the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, among other things. In Exodus, that family line starts its trek back to Exodus and back to Canaan, and he wants us to remember the things that went on in Genesis. So watch how he does it. Let's look at Genesis first. We have in the creation week, on the fifth day of creation, the first blessing that comes along. Before this, non-living things are created. And finally, in the fifth day, created things occur. And so I want you to hear the word bless here. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures," the fish. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas." God blessed the fish by multiplying them. And then it goes to the end of the book, and I took the verses from Genesis 46:8. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt: Jacob and his sons. Then a list of Jacob's sons is given, along with grandchildren even. So it's a big list. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So he lists the 70 people that came into Egypt that were a part of Jacob's family. And we finally get to Exodus. And look how it repeats what's near the end of Genesis. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. You see that in verse 8 at the beginning in Genesis 46. Then it goes on, just like Genesis 46 names the names of his sons. In Exodus 1, verse 2, it names the names of Jacob's sons, excluding the grandchildren: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. all the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, just like it says, all the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So it says 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt, so he's not listed. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. And the very next verse tells us they multiplied the blessing. But the people of Israel were fruitful and swarmed greatly, and they multiplied. Are you hearing some words from Genesis chapter 1? Yes, you are. And grew exceedingly in number, so that the land was filled with them. And then remember, it says that the living creatures in the water swarmed with swarms. So Israelites swarmed, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied and filled the land. So he uses, with these 7 verses, God is telling us that he has blessed the Israelites with seed just as he had promised. Remember, the promise was that there would be seed, land, seed, blessing, and here the promised blessing of seed. God uses, or Moses and God uses the fish to describe Israel's blessing of growth in numbers. This tells us that though there were hundreds of years that separated Genesis from Exodus, and it seemed as though God was silent all those years, God was still blessing his people with the promise of seed. They multiplied, they became fruitful, they filled the land, they swarmed like fish that were blessed. So here we go with the Hebrews 11. We have in Hebrews 11, verse 21, by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. Now we're going to find out why this is by faith, his blessing of Joseph's son, because it's an odd kind of blessing. It really is. Let me explain to you about the firstborn. The firstborn was the one born first, except when it becomes a technical term for the one who wasn't born first, but got the firstborn rights. And that's what happens in Jacob's family. It happened to Jacob. Remember, Jacob was not firstborn. Esau was. And Esau did not get the firstborn rights, did he? He lost out. He sold them to Jacob. Neither did he get the blessing. And Isaac, the same thing happened because Ishmael was firstborn. But Isaac got firstborn rights. So the firstborn can be the one born first, or the one who receives the rights of the firstborn. And what were the rights of the firstborn? They got the inheritance, which usually meant the land. And they got a double portion of that inheritance. So Jacob distributed the land rights in a special way. And we will look to see how he does this in the case of Joseph. Joseph, though he is not firstborn, born first, in fact, he's the 11th born of the sons, he's going to get the firstborn rights, the double portion. Now, watch how Jacob does this. It says in Genesis 48, the narrator says, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So Joseph took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh was born first, and then Ephraim. So, of course, Manasseh is named first. Israel, or Jacob, summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said, well, he's going to give a summary of his life right now. But in the midst of the summary of his life, all of a sudden he's going to insert something important. So let's watch for that. God Almighty appeared to me at Luz. We call it Bethel because he renamed Luz Bethel in the land of Canaan. And now watch the promise. What was the promise? Land, seed, blessing, right? Watch how those things are named in what Jacob says to his son. God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you a company of peoples. That's seed. Now watch, and will give you this land. So we have land, seed, blessing that was given by God to Jacob. And guess where it happened? It was as he was escaping Esau and going up to Haran, or as it was later called, Paddan Aram. And he was going up there because his father and mother sent him there to escape from Esau, and so that he could get a wife from amongst Terah's family. Remember, that is important. And to your seed, there's the blessing of seed, after you for an everlasting possession. Now he interrupts with verse 5, but I want you to go down to verse 7 so we can see the flow of his summary of life. As for me, when I came from Paddan, that's Haran, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Oh, we know that name, don't we? Okay, so why does he talk to Joseph about this part of his life? Well, Joseph would be very interested, wouldn't he? Because Rachel was his mother. And just as Jacob loved Rachel, the most of his wives, he also loved Joseph the most. And of course, his brothers knew that, didn't they? Okay, so what interrupts that summary of his life that he gives to Joseph? Well, this in verse 5. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh. Hold it. Stop right there. Ephraim and Manasseh. Wait a second. Joseph brought to him Manasseh and Ephraim because Manasseh is the one born first, and then Ephraim and Jacob, he says Ephraim and Manasseh. What's going on here? Let's, he says, they are mine. They shall be mine. So he says that twice. He says it before Ephraim and Manasseh, and he says it after Ephraim and Manasseh. And he says, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. What is he doing here? Well, he's giving Joseph the double portion. His sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as Jacob says, are going to get a portion, just as Reuben and Simeon and the rest of the sons are. So the double portion is, one part of the double portion is going to Ephraim, the other part of the double portion is going to Manasseh. Joseph gets the double portion through his sons. And so, since Ephraim and Manasseh are adopted by Jacob in order to get the portions, they also become two tribes. You've heard of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, haven't you? Have you ever heard of the tribe of Joseph? No. I remember when I first realized that. I said, wait a minute, what happened to Joseph? He got the double portion. So Ephraim and Manasseh become a tribe of their own, and they will get the tribal portion, the land portion, just like Reuben and Simeon and the rest of the brothers. So they're adopted. Thus, they become two tribes. There's no tribe of Joseph, and they get the two portions of land that belong to Joseph. Well, when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he spoke. Who are these? Remember, he's just about blind, isn't he? And Joseph replies, these are my sons whom God has given me here. Jacob says, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Blessing is all through this story. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near, and he kissed them and embraced them. So Jacob kisses and embraces his grandchildren. And Israel spoke to Joseph. That's Jacob. Jacob says, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your seed also. And the narrator goes on, and Joseph took them. Now we're going to have to see how this works out. Joseph took them, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel, and Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them to him. In other words, he takes the youngest in his right hand, Ephraim. He takes the older one in his left hand because he's going to bring him to Jacob. And from his left hand, he'll hand over to Jacob's right hand the one born first. And from his right hand, he'll place in Jacob's left hand the one born second, to have Jacob bless him. Now watch. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim. Wait a second, he had to cross over to do that, didn't he? And then, who was the younger, and his left hand he put on the head of Manasseh. So he has to do this in order to make Ephraim be at his right hand and Manasseh be at his left hand. And it's at the right hand that's most important. The firstborn son was always given, the one who was named firstborn was always given to the right hand of the father. So there's a switch. And Israel stretched out, let me read it again. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim. What is he naming Ephraim? He's naming Ephraim firstborn, even though he's secondborn. And who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was firstborn. And he blessed Joseph by blessing his sons, right? Now, that is why, from the very beginning, Jacob named them Ephraim and Manasseh. And notice, even in the story, Ephraim, Manasseh, Ephraim comes first, and then Ephraim, Manasseh. Ephraim comes first in this, what the narrator speaks. Thus, Ephraim receives the firstborn, the rights of the firstborn. What's interesting is that when the tribes after Solomon divide to the divided kingdom, the southern kingdom is run by Judah. It has Jerusalem in it, and the Judahites are the king. Whereas the northern kingdom is often called Ephraim because he's firstborn. Even though there's 10 tribes up there, the tribes are called Ephraim. Let's look at what happens now. Jacob blesses the two boys. The God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. Now it says he blessed Jacob. Joseph, do you ever notice that what happens to your children, if it's a good thing, it's good for you when they are blessed, isn't it? It's a blessing to you when people bless or speak good about your children. And that's the way it is with Joseph. When Jacob blesses the boys, he's blessing Joseph. And in them shall my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Oh boy, here's that multitude again, like swarms of fish. Okay, and the next page starts. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, again, Ephraim is named first, on the right, with the right hand, Jacob put his right hand, crossed over to make sure he put his right hand on Ephraim. It displeased Joseph, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. No. Manasseh is firstborn. He gets the blessing. And Joseph spoke to his father, not this way, my father, since this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. You've got it all wrong, he's telling his father, isn't he? But his father refused. And that is the moment that the writer of Hebrews says is Jacob's moment of faith, when he blesses the sons of Joseph correctly, God's way. Now, this isn't the only time the firstborn we've talked about. The firstborn does not get the rights, does it? In Cain, Abel, and Seth, it's Seth's line that is chosen for the Messianic seed line. We have Isaac and Ishmael. It is Isaac that gets the firstborn rights. And of course, Jacob himself, he gets the firstborn rights. And Joseph gets the firstborn rights, even though he is not born first, but 11th. And yet he can't understand why his father is doing this. And he tries to stop his father. And his father has the faith to know that this is the way it's supposed to be. His father refused. And Jacob says, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become, or Manasseh also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he. Just like the prophecy says of Jacob. Uh, Jacob would be greater than Esau. And his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Narrator says, so Jacob blessed them that day. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. And whenever you read a list of the tribes, it will always have Ephraim first and then Manasseh from now on. Then Israel spoke to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. This is a promise that was given way back. God had foretold to Abraham that his people would go into captivity by a strange nation. But God would, after a time, bring them back again. After a time was about 400 years. And he promised Abraham, it's not going to happen in your time, but it will happen. Your people will be in servitude to another nation, but I will bring them back to this land again. This was passed on from Abraham to Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob, and now Jacob is passing it on to Joseph. He will bring them back again. Okay, the next portion of Hebrews 11 is in verse 22. Now we have Joseph. By Joseph, at the end of his life, by faith, Joseph at the end of his life made mention of the Exodus. Joseph is in Egypt. His brothers are in Egypt. It's the end of Joseph's life, and he's going to tell them about the Exodus of the Israelites. And he gave directions concerning his bones. I always speak of the next section. Follow those bones. We're going to follow bones today. Genesis 50, the very end of Genesis, and at the end of the chapter. The narrator says, so Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph spoke to his brothers. Now it's so important. I am about to die. But God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin. These are the last words of Genesis. What part of the promise is this last section about? Was it land, seed, or blessing? Well, notice he keeps on talking about the land and that they are going back to the land again. So this is all about the land, and it prepares us for Exodus, where the people of Israel leave Egypt and their trek back to the land, which is the next 4 books is about their trek back to the land. So it's right to end that way. isn't it? Okay, so we have this prophecy. It's the end of the book, but the author not only puts it at the end, so we're left on a cliffhanger, really. Uh, but he also makes a chiasm out of it. And notice, let's look at it. And Joseph spoke to his brothers, I am about to die. That's A. And look at the bottom A. So Joseph died. Being 110 years old, they embalmed him and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Then the B. But God will visit you. And our second B. God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. God's going to visit you. That means you're going to go back to the land, and you're going to carry my bones because I will be long dead before you go back to the land. And then in the middle, it's something about a promise given. God will visit you, and then C, and bring you up out of this land to the land of Canaan that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, Jacob. Now watch that word swear or swore, it's going to be used again. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear. So God swears that he had given the land. He swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so Joseph has his brothers swear, when you do go back, because I know you're going to go back, because God has promised that he will visit you so that you can go back. How about that word visit? That's a visit? Well, that is a technical term that's used over and over again in Scripture. And it just means that it's the description of God, God's intervention, bringing about either harm or good. So when God visits a nation that has hurt his people, he's going to visit them with punishment. But when God visits his people, he's going to intervene by bringing them back to the land. So let's read it again with that in mind. I want you to notice the dark print. I am about to die, but God will visit you. Visit describes God's intervention either for good or bad, but this time it means something good. And bring you up out of the land, out of this land, Egypt, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, when God brings you back to the land, you take my bones. God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. The irony is that Genesis begins with life and ends in a coffin. And why? Well, it's because man falls. They need the one who will crush the head of the serpent, don't they? The last 3 verses of Genesis are chiastically arranged, for they are a sneak preview to the rest of Torah, which describes Israel's trek back to the promised land. But follow those bones with me, will you? Let's go back to the next page. In Genesis 15 is the prophecy to Abraham, which I told you about, but here it is in print. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, And behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your seed will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, that's Egypt, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. They shall come out. That's used down here. God will surely visit you, and you will carry my bones from here. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. This prophecy is handed down from generation to generation. And in Genesis 33, we're going to learn about a piece of property that Jacob is going to buy, and it's going to play an important element in Israel's future. So I want you to listen to it. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, that's from Haran, up north, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, or God, the God of Israel. Now later we're going to find out that Jacob bought this piece of property particularly for Joseph. So let's go to chapter 50, which we just read, but let's read it in context. So Joseph remained in Egypt. Remember that place that was told to Abraham they would be as servants? So Joseph remained in Egypt, and he and his father's house, that's all his brothers. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brother, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's exactly what God told Abraham, I'm going to bring you up out, and you're going to the land that I promised. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you and shall carry you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. Yeah, that's what he says. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Now we get to Exodus 13. Have the people forgotten? It's been hundreds of years. Could they have forgotten what was promised by the brothers to Joseph? Well, let's see. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer or closer. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. Look what it says next. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear hundreds of years before, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. Remember, that was said above. God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. The exact quote. Then Joshua, it's the end of the wilderness trek. They've entered the land, and under Joshua, they've conquered over much of the land. And it says this in the last chapter of the book. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. As for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem. Remember the story of Shechem? They buried Joseph's bones in Shechem, in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and that Shechem was in Ephraim's part of the land. Now I want to show you how the Old Testament prepares us for the New Testament. And also, the New Testament is dependent on the Old Testament. Watch the background information that John gives to us before when he's going to tell us the story of the Samaritan woman, because Samaria is in the northern part of Israel, and it is where Joseph's son's property is. And it says this in John 4, 1-6. Jesus left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to, or it was necessary, to pass through Samaria. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the ancient city of Shechem, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. Now when you read John chapter 4, and you're reading this story, you're taken back. And the background information that makes this story kind of pop. This is where Jesus is going to meet the Samaritan woman. John is telling us by incorporating this story of Jacob and Shechem and Joseph. John is telling us that the story of Jesus is a continuation of the Old Testament. We can't leave out the Old Testament. If you read the book of John without the Old Testament, you'll never get it, because it's based on the Old Testament, just like this story is. To ignore the Old Testament in your study of the New Testament is like starting a book in the middle and skipping over the first half. You'll be lost. Much of what you would see would make no sense without the first half. Much of what you see in the New Testament makes no sense unless you know the Old Testament. That's why I love the Old Testament.